Hey drifters, and welcome back. In this guide I'm going to walk you through every step of Henry PDT's Definitive Parkour Mod regarding installation, activation and gameplay, from the simpler things all the way to more complex interactions and binds. By the time this video is out, the mod is also in development for the Kenway games, but this guide will focus exclusively on the AC1 to Revelations versions. Still, most of its logic and functionality should apply across the board. Please note that this mod is made primarily for players who are already proficient in vanilla old-school parkour and wish to squeeze even more control, functionality and unparalleled freedom out of these games. If you aren't familiar with concepts such as ejects, manual jumps, sledge grabs or wall run cancels, I would absolutely recommend you at the very least check out this amazing classic parkour guide by Leo K to gain an understanding of the very basics. Before we get into it, I ask that you try not to feel overwhelmed or daunted by how long and comprehensive this video is, as I simply wanted to make a guide that'll cover every possible bit of ground, capable of suiting all types of players. So feel free to take things gradually, take the video at your own pace, and don't worry about instantly knowing everything there is to it. That aside, let's start with installation. As getting the mod installed for AC1 and 2 takes a couple of bonus steps, we're going to cover those first, while those of you who wish to get it for Brotherhood Revelations can skip to this timestamp, from which we'll go through steps that are shared across the board. In short, Eagle Patch is a generally good to have quality of life mod that, beside improving certain technical and input related things next to some graphical improvements, content unlocks for the AC2 version, and even the ability to skip their opening videos, is also needed for the parkour mod to function. To start off, we'll have to open the Eagle Patch Nexus page, choosing either the AC1 or AC2 version, both linked in the description. I'll go with AC2 for the tutorial's sake. After getting to the page, we'll first click the link provided on the first step of the mod's installation text, which should directly download this ASI loader. We can then make our way back and into the Files tab and click on Manual Download for the mod itself. After finishing all the downloads, you'll need to navigate to where you stored the files as well as the directory of your chosen game. If you use Ubisoft Connect, you can quickly open your game's directory by opening your library, clicking on the game's options button, then hovering over Manage to open its properties. In the installation tab, you can then click Open Folder. If you use another launcher like Steam, the process is likely similar. With both windows open, we'll double-click the ASI loader zip file to display its contents and move the file inside of it directly into the game's directory. We'll also have to open the Eagle Patch RAR file, but since Windows doesn't natively support this compressed format, I suggest installing a program like WinRAR to open it. After doing so, we'll create a new folder in the game's directory and call it Scripts before moving the ASI and any files into it. And so, we've installed Eagle Patch. Should you wish to check its own functionality out in more detail, you can read through the README text file or refer to its mod page. Cheat Engine is, in simple terms, a tool that allows for memory scanning and value as well as low-level instruction editing of a given process, and is what the mod uses to function. It's worth keeping in mind that the nature of this program, while not inherently malicious, may still trigger some false positives when it comes to certain antiviruses and other games' anti-cheats. You can simply temporarily disable your antivirus while downloading and installing Cheat Engine, and also make sure you aren't running it and the parkour mod before closing any potentially sensitive anti-cheats. To install Cheat Engine, you'll first have to visit its main page, linked in the description, and click on the big, needlessly suspicious green download button. Then navigate to where you downloaded it and run the installer. Select your preferred language, click Next on the following page, and then absolutely make sure to click on Skip All to decline the installation of any additional bloatware. Cheat Engine will then take a minute to install, after which you can exit the installer without launching the application on exit. Now onto the mod itself. Using the links in the description, you can pick the game you wish to install the mod for, then start the manual download. As the mod is packaged in a zip file, we'll first have to extract it by double-clicking to expose its contents, then dragging the mod file into wherever you'd like to save it. With everything set up, we can finally run the mod, starting by having it open alongside the game. Simply open the cheat table, click on Yes to let the mod run in case of an administrator prompt, and click on Yes on the Execute this Lua script window, after which we'll run the game. While I tend to open the mod before my game for convenience's sake, the order doesn't actually matter. It only matters that you do not try to activate the mod before reaching the game's main menu, as it will fail and require you to close and reopen the cheat table. Once the game loads up, it's possible to activate the mod at any point, which we'll do by pressing R3 and D-pad up at once. The same bind also serves as a mod reset should you ever need it. If you also ever need to deactivate the mod, you can do so by combining R3 and D-pad down instead. As the majority of this mod's functionality is actively triggered by various input binds, of which there are too many to fit alongside the game's vanilla controls, a mode switch is required to free these buttons up when you wish to use the features assigned to them without any conflict, and we call it Parkour Mode. Parkour Mode is toggled off by default upon mod activation, but we can toggle it on and off ourselves by pressing in the right stick on controller or G on keyboard. As a concrete example, while R1 normally opens the weapon wheel while not in Parkour Mode, turning it on disables that functionality, instead letting it serve as the force hang modifier, which we'll get into later. The same thing also applies to, for example, attacks and assassinations, which Parkour Mode disables, exclusively assigning the armed hand button to vaults and other mod features. NPC lock-on and air tackles cannot execute while in Parkour Mode either, preventing accidental air tackles. Another thing you might have noticed if you play with HUD on is that Parkour Mode actually disables it while active, serving as a decent indicator. If you wish to disable this behavior though, you can navigate to the cheat engine window and find the HUD hide option entry under Parkour Mode, then double-click the selection on its right to open a drop-down menu, selecting No HUD Hide and clicking OK. Modifiers are how we'll refer to the main, manually activated mod features, with their name coming from the fact that most don't perform new moves or actions, but rather influence the targeting, exits, or general behavior of existing ones. Using force hang as a short example again, applying it in general movement is done by holding the modifier button down as you're inputting a parkour action, which will result in said action targeting a hang landing when it can. To reiterate, the vast majority of modifiers must be used while inputting for an action, meaning that they won't function or affect anything after the move has been actuated, that is, after your character entered the action's respective animation. Having covered this, let's start with some true functionality. Force Freeform is perhaps the most powerful and versatile yet simplest modifier. Activated by holding L3 on a PS controller, it disables aimed, prescriptive targeting for parkour actions such as jumps, ejects, swings, wall runs and others, instead letting you perform their freeform counterparts. Guaranteeing that your character won't attempt to scan the context you're pointing at means you can circumvent any undesirable instance of automatic targeting the game may do for you, especially if the resulting freeform trajectory better suits your intent, let alone directly reflects it. It even ignores leaps of faith. More concretely, there's a handful of purposes for which I mostly utilize it, most notably in one of two cases. The first is in the vicinity of or atop an NSO, which means non-standing object, making sure that a jump or eject I wish to perform into a freeform state doesn't get its targeting pulled to a nearby prescriptive landing destination, if not the very object I'm on top of. The latter happens mainly when on longer NSOs like ropes, when directionally pointing near the object's angle. Similarly, it's also useful next to a wall face or object hosting a ledge or handhold that would normally pull targeting into a prescriptive hang. Forcing a freeform action lets me bypass such targeting, after which I tend to follow up with the ledge grab into eject combo. In cases where a lower destination assuming targeting priority causes height loss, especially when significantly lower than where I'd like to go, forcing freeform lets me assume its default, higher trajectory, allowing for more range and control from the ledge grab into eject combo that likely follows. As previously stated, force freeform is also applicable to wall runs, mainly serving two purposes. The first is obviously an aesthetic one, where it's usually more aesthetically pleasing to perform an eject up to middle height destinations from an empty wall run animation, instead of cancelling out of one that has your character grasping for a handhold above. Beside aesthetics, freeform wall runs can also be forced on objects or walls low enough to usually flow into the uncancelable run-up animation, allowing for eject optimization from objects that would otherwise force a choice between prematurely cancelling or waiting to be able to jump off the top. I will note that it's best avoided when reaching heights that later make your character eject from midair if you want to retain a sense of grounding or wish to make your parkour run or choreography look good. And finally, Force Freeform hosts one additional bit of unique functionality, accessible only midair, disabling two types of automatic wall interactions. Firstly, it disables the automatic grab the character snaps into if directly colliding with a handhold they're facing, allowing you to essentially slide down the surface until you choose to grab it. On the other hand, if colliding with a wall without any handholds to auto-grab, it instead disables this bounce animation, which we call a wall rebound. This is particularly useful when wrapping around corners at demanding angles, as you can ensure that your character will gently slide by the corner if you've slightly misjudged the initial action's direction. Parkour Down is another straightforward modifier attempting to bias a variety of parkour actions reasonably further down by targeting lower or less horizontally offset destinations, as well as applying a slightly weaker trajectory to these actions if they haven't targeted a landing destination, in other words, if they went freeform. On a PS controller, it's enabled simply by holding L1, and because of how the mod has to approach this feature's implementation, there's two things to note. If pointed at objects or edges to prescriptively target, Parkour Down heavily prioritizes foot landing destinations when possible. This doesn't mean that you can't use it to apply a lower bias to actions that would end up in a hang, but it'll only let you do so if the player character was going to target a hang anyway. I personally only use it when intending to land on feet, as there's other features and combinations specifically made for these interactions. While this may initially seem like a drawback, the fact that it makes for a decent foot landing filter means you're usually guaranteed to target a more powerful and versatile state, as more actions in range are available to you while standing or perched. It also serves as a consistent way of prioritizing a foot landing in cases like these, where the existence of a handhold or ledge next to the desired landing destination tends to take target priority with a hang landing. The second property of Parkour Down is that it will prioritize targeting objects that are horizontally closer to the player, rarely finding itself in edge cases where it chooses a target closer to the player's standing height, if not even equal or above it. Luckily, we'll soon look into a workaround for these cases. These properties also further aid the character's ability to prescriptively land near standing surface edges when approaching them from the inside more consistently than normal vanilla actions. We call this inner ledge targeting, and while there's a better suited modifier for this, it's still generally useful for the purpose of targeting a greater number of contexts below the player. Before moving on to other modifiers, we'll utilize what we know so far to showcase this mod's most powerful aspect, modifier combination, meaning that it's possible to combine the behavior of different modifiers simply by keeping them active simultaneously. Despite the limited number of possible intuitive inputs calling for the existence of button combinations that may seem somewhat disjointed, the mod greatly strives to keep as many of them as possible, especially the most versatile and commonly usable ones, logically consistent. As for a concrete example, it's easy to find oneself wondering whether it's possible to perform a stricter Parkour Down action that, instead of relying on context for its trajectory and targeting, assumes an independent, consistent baseline trajectory, same as other freeform actions. As you've likely already guessed, this is achievable exactly by holding the Force Freeform and Parkour Down modifier simultaneously. This specific combination is highly versatile as it opens limitless opportunities to assume a low trajectory, without requiring any specific landing destination or standing surface to jog off. Throughout the guide, we'll explore these combinations alongside the remaining modifiers, covering the aforementioned less intuitive edge cases too. Parkour Fire, activated by L2, strives to prioritize the horizontally furthest prescriptive destination possible within the character's baseline targeting limits. This means it exists in contrast to Parkour Down, whose mechanical function very roughly boils down to targeting objects horizontally closer to the player, usually aiming for a lower landing destination only as a result. The main uses of Parkour Fire, next to the rather simple possibility of wishing to land on a specific further object, are in trying to maximize your horizontal velocity by skipping landing destinations you may not wish to gradually cover, or similarly targeting past awkward contexts, hosting many possible destinations in a single area. This extends the Parkour Fire's ability to help avoid the directionally biased targeting previously brought up with Force Freeform, with similar notable use cases, as it also respects your directional input far more rigidly. It's worth noting that its ability to override this directional bias is weaker in AC Brotherhood and Revelations as opposed to AC 1 and 2. The contrast between Parkour Far and Parkour Down is also what makes the former the exact solution to those edge cases in which Parkour Down doesn't target low precisely due to its closeness bias. Using Parkour Fire will target the further and in this case lower accessible destination, but it's worth noting it can sometimes choose a target that'll make your character assume a trajectory colliding them with the higher object. Moving on to its simplest combination, we'll cover how it works with Force Freeform. When applied to an action, Freeform Fire provides a strength increase while retaining all previously discussed freeform properties. That being said, there's a difference in how it functions when applied to swings versus jumps or ejects, for example. With jumps and ejects, it expectedly provides a static boost, furthering their range. This also means that it will break past the thoughtful physical limits the game assigns to their maximum freeform strength and, as such, isn't best suited to consistently grounded gameplay or good-looking and relatively natural choreography, which is why I personally don't utilize it. Still, it's there as an option should you wish to use it for whichever purpose, as well as for the sake of bind consistency and predictability. When used on swings or other actions though, grounding isn't an issue. Specifically with swings, there's a fixed baseline range boost much like with jumps or ejects that can be further extended by starting from larger, especially more vertical dives, which we'll get into later. Despite the static boost, essentially all usage is considered grounded as free hang states aren't notably advantageous, especially with normal freeform swings feeling somewhat weak. Now, it would be sound to conclude that there must be a combination with Parkour Down too, and it's what we call Parkour Down Low. Parkour Down Low is the first case of a combination that doesn't combine the behavior of down and far, even if logically tied to them as a height bias modifier. In many ways, it is a stronger version of Parkour Down, capable of targeting even lower, prioritizing foot landings far more strictly and often working past the caveats of normal Parkour Down's closeness bias. Despite sounding like Parkour Down but ideal, that isn't necessarily true, as it's also far more volatile due to how it must be implemented. Looking back at its foot landing tendency, we find the main source of volatility, as Parkour Down Low doesn't merely prioritize foot landings but forces them onto nearly any destination within range, even handholds. It's probably easy to imagine how that could impede one's flow, if not produce outright silly landings on handholds that definitely shouldn't be able to support them. On some occasions, although quite reined in, it can also heavily break the height limit for certain actions, targeting absurdly high. Such behavior is most common with jumps onto walls due to the generally high destination density and is not intended for use as it results in silly looking jumps, breaking grounding and eject optimization. Still, when used wisely and with grounding in mind, this property can be quite powerful, whether to fully ensure a prescriptive landing from the inside of a standing surface or on handholds deep enough to seem able to support a momentary foot landing. A bit of advice I can give applies if you wish to use Parkour Down Low for low context after landing on an NSO, where it's best to wait a short while so your character can start settling on it. This brings them a bit further, letting the targeting system see your destination where otherwise you might fall back into freeform. This can sometimes help Parkour Down and Far too. And much like normal Parkour Down when used with a jump, swing, eject without a valid destination, it'll result in a further weakened freeform trajectory. Furthermore, actively combining it with Force Freeform behaves exactly like Freeform Parkour Down, just extremely weak. There's one additional quirk to the Force Freeform combination when applied to ejects though. In the base games, ejecting out of a free hang, that is out of the hang state in which the character's feet freely hang in the air, isn't possible for obvious reasons. The mod adds an exception though, where it's possible to perform an eject when using this combination as you're dropping into a hang, which is justified by the extremely low range. Enabled by R1, Force Hang forces a prescriptive hang landing on its target, even when in foot landing range. If there's a valid destination, this is usually manifested by the character targeting for a hang where they would normally have landed on feet, or forcing hang targeting on another nearby destination if the foot landing would have gone relatively low. Force Hang also removes the angular restrictions put onto hang targeting by the base game, allowing for valid targeting from almost any angle, even nearly parallel, as opposed to the usual limit of about 45 degrees. There's a difference in behavior when applied to jumps and ejects as opposed to swings though. With the former, you might sometimes notice it targeting lower than the character should be able to in the presence of higher, potentially more useful destinations, usually on walls. On the other hand, usage with swings results in higher, often more favorable targeting, maximally reaching the swinging object's own height, neatly allowing for chain swings like this too. Despite the former initially seeming unfavorable, this is by design. While the method chosen for swings indeed often reaches higher, it's far more volatile, allowing for landings even in locations without enough space to hang, which forces the character to clip below, potentially making them fall through the floor when attempting to pull up. It also strictly replaces foot landings, circumventing the more intuitive behavior of targeting hangs on closer height levels if a foot landing were to go very low. While these issues apply less to contexts in which you can swing, jumps and ejects can't afford to lose out on their stability and versatility. Still, there's numerous instances in which one may wish to swap their behavior, which is possible. We'll return to this in the advanced section. In either case though, force hang is very directionally sensitive, striving to target precisely where you're pointing if there's multiple destinations in the general direction, so make sure to aim it with care. The simplest modifier combinations for force hang are naturally parkour down, far, and down low. Starting with parkour down, its baseline effect is quite clear, usually biasing the force hang targeting further down, allowing for far larger dives and a safer guarantee of prescriptively targeting any low destination. This combination alone, especially paired with ejects, allows for very effective, safe and easy parkour down along handhold dense surfaces, with the lack of angular restrictions all but guaranteeing detection of a low destination. There's more to it than a low bias though, as it also tends to prioritize destinations that'll pull your character into a free hang state rather consistently, providing the ability to follow the resulting dive up with a swing if such destination exists. While still most commonly applicable to descents, this property also lets you utilize hang landings on heights closer to, if not above you. The fact that it makes for a rather decent free hang filter is why we sometimes call this combination dive beam too. The influence of parkour far on force hang is even simpler, as there's no specific filtering, instead simply targeting further if slightly lower destinations with a hang, often allowing for rather massive dives. Much like parkour far by itself, this combination can skip closer by destinations, prioritizing a further one, only with a prescriptive hang landing in this case. Unlike standalone parkour far though, the implementation required to reliably target such distances can sometimes allow for dives that break the usual action range. As they inherently end in a hang though, grounding isn't a large issue, but you can refrain from performing any dives that could seem off to you. For the sake of context, we at times refer to this combination as the far dive. The last target biased combination is activated with parkour down low, expectedly targeting yet lower than dive beam. While also a free hang filter, it's less versatile on more local height levels, more violently skipping them when trying to target low. Of course, verbally explaining the exact intricacies of how these variations target in every scenario is essentially impossible, but you'll intuitively get a hang of it by playing. It's also important to use all three biased combinations, most notably the far one, with awareness and care, as they can sometimes target contexts that clip the character into the floor regardless of eject or swing type. Due to its volatility, the far combination can additionally target handholds hidden behind walls, clipping through the building. Before reloading the save though, you may attempt to get unstuck by using the far or down combination to target a potential outside destination. The volatility of force hang when combined with parkour far or down low sometimes results in yet another example of unwanted behavior, either killing momentum by targeting the starting surface or starting too early to scan its proper destination. That's why it's good practice to momentarily let go of flex before re-engaging upon reaching the surface's absolute edge, ensuring more consistent targeting. This method can sometimes help dives of other types too. Lastly, it's worth noting that all three height variations along the standalone neutral force hang present a bias to generally larger surfaces. This means they may target handholds with more area, mostly prioritizing standing surface edges. While helpful in countering neutral force hang's undesirable downward bias, it works to the detriment of down, far, and down low variance reliability. Should you find yourself in this scenario though, it's possible to circumvent by pointing further down the wall's side, with the standing surface edge no longer being in range. Moving on to its combination with freeform, if there's a prescriptive landing destination for the action it's applied to, near miss results in a weakened trajectory that will nearly miss it. Of course, that requires a valid initial target to begin with the action going into its vanilla freeform variant otherwise. Due to force hang already being extremely reliable on a local level, the main use of near miss instead comes from the resulting fall. When unsure of what kind of targeting might come from other force hang variants, the rather straight vertical fall along a surface reliably lets you pass by every handhold in range while giving you time to choose the correct one. There's yet more to it though, as near miss itself also works with targeting biases, meaning that it'll work on destinations that would have gotten targeted by parkour down, far, or down low. If you plan on using near miss in Revelations though, you may notice Ezio, despite entering a freeform state, often automatically grabbing the surface in front of him, especially after swinging off overhangs or similar contexts. Of course, simply continuing to hold force freeform for a short while disables the auto grab. As we have, among various other use cases, examined how force hang allows for free hang targeting, that is, swing entries, let's look into how the mod exactly affects swinging itself before getting into vaults. You've likely already noticed the character swinging off a variety of beams, ledges, ropes and other objects instead of swinging beams exclusively like in vanilla. More specifically, the mod passively, by default, allows for swings out of essentially any free hang state, where your character is hanging with their feet dangling, not sat on any surface or object. If you wish to normally pull up though, you can either let go of high profile and legs and wait for the recovery animation to finish, or actively enable the vanilla pull-up by starting to hold legs without high profile at least a bit before reaching the object with a hang, disabling swing-like behavior. The mod also passively allows swinging off within an angle range of roughly 60 degrees to each side, instead of the base game constraint of only going directly forward. Should you wish to ensure the maximum swing angle, it's possible to point your directional input further than this range, as there's an angular dead zone that clamps the value back to 60. Of course, performing strong swings at large angles can sometimes look wrong, which is why I personally tend to reserve those to straighter angles. As self-flip is an action only present in AC Brotherhood and Revelations, feel free to skip to the following timestamp if you're going with AC 1 or 2. Concretely, self-flip is one of two special swing variations introduced by AC Brotherhood, called horse flips, originally only accessible when jumping into any beam from a horse. In the base game, this variation triggers when there's no valid destination for Ezio to swing to, while the mod makes it fully accessible and independent of surrounding context. To perform it, you must simply point your directional input backwards in relation to Ezio's direction, while holding high profile and legs as with a normal swing, essentially telling him to swing backwards. While extremely consistent, you may encounter rare occasions in which the system preventing their execution through objects also prevents them in a valid scenario, the override for which we'll look into later once we examine more advanced horse flip functionality. When coming across a freely hangable object, handhold or ledge, the mod makes it possible to swing off them without any recovery period or windup after performing a manual or automatic grab caused by collision. By default, instant swing is only accessible from grabs that don't induce the staggered recovery animation, in which the character barely holds onto the object with one hand, but it's possible to fully guarantee it simply by starting to hold legs at least a bit before grabbing the object. You might end up doing that by default anyway, as it's more intuitive to queue up the appropriate swing input first. Of course, you can also hold any modifier combination you may wish to use with the swing. Additionally, instant swings also apply when dropping into a hang. When it comes to Revelations though, performing instant swings out of hookblade grabs is impossible, but swinging out of automatic grabs is as easy as in other games, as there's no difference in their function. Despite the swing usually originating from a freeform airtime, the calculations responsible for the range added to the freeform far swings still return an accurate result. If performed after staggered recovery though, the value no longer applies. There's also a passive change introduced to how swinging beams are targeted. Instead of the base game always forcing prescriptive hang targeting and consequently allowing for a swing, the mod simply treats their targeting as with any other beam, allowing for foot landings too. Similarities to beams end after having landed on top though, as the character cannot statically sit on them, slipping off unless followed by a jump or wall run. I personally consider it a relatively neat drawback, as it's now an object type that forces faster thinking if used for the advantageous foot landing state. Of course, if you wish to hang and swing off a beam that'd now cause a foot landing, you can target them with the appropriate force hang variation, like any other destination. It's worth noting that this change in targeting, though, introduces a rather rare edge case in which a swinging beam that'd normally get targeted with a hang fails due to its proximity, with the player jumping into freeform instead. You can circumvent these cases by using force hang when sensing your presence in such scenario, or simply using it every time you wish to target a hang landing on these beams. If you end up in that freeform state though, your character will still likely automatically grab the beam if you haven't already guaranteed so yourself by manually grabbing, after which instant swing comes into play. As one of the most eye-catching and versatile features, vaults are quite unique, having only been a manual action in AC1, now enabled in the Ezio trilogy, and made far more manual and controllable in all 4 games. Vaulting is enabled by holding square on a PS controller. It functions by replacing the prescriptive foot landing of whichever action you're performing it from. So if an action like a jump or eject was going to target for a foot landing, adding vault to its input will instead vault over that exact destination. As you can see, this means you can pull it off not only from a jump or while running on flat ground, but out of ejects and swings too. The fact that it doesn't change targeting also means you can easily predict where it's possible. If you can target something with feet, you can vault there too. By default, if done from lesser heights, the character exits vaults by dropping onto the surface below or targeting nearby destinations and objects. If done from greater heights though, with no destination within reach, it smoothly transitions into a hang instead. Another fundamental property is that vaults cannot be consecutively chained. In the Ezio trilogy, you can also vault from a foot hang. That being said, this generally works best when there's at least a slight drop on the opposite side, instead of going up flat or even slanted surfaces. This is possible from other actions too, but I'd recommend you avoid the awkward exit if aiming for good-looking parkour, as it easily breaks flow. As vaults exclusively replace prescriptive foot landings though, we can't use force freeform nor force hang on their entries, and while we can use parkour down, far, or down low while queuing them up, it doesn't affect the vault itself, but the initial entry as with any other action. Keep in mind that starting significantly lower vaults breaks the trajectory's limits, looking odd as it causes teleportation. True modifier control instead comes from their exits, making vaults rather unique. The freeform vault exit is easily the simplest and most versatile, where holding force freeform in the middle of a vault overrides all prescriptive targeting and, most importantly, overrides the hang exit regardless of height. This is most useful when you wish to smoothly drop from heights that are still safe or break your fall with a grab, before ejecting. If we wish for the opposite though, we can force a vault to hang by continuing to hold the vault input as it plays out. This pairs beautifully with instant swings, as you can make sure to perform a vault to hang before smoothly swinging out into the opposite direction. Returning to our usual modifiers, parkour down is another commonly useful exit, extending the vault's targeting further down. The effect of parkour far is easy to imagine, extending targeting out and even slightly upwards in comparison. Unfortunately, due to implementation requirements, it allows for foot landings even when targeting objects of the same, if not greater height. For obvious reasons, these connect weirdly and aren't necessarily intended for use. Expectedly similar to parkour down, the low variant attempts targeting yet lower, also exhibiting parkour down low's usual forced foot landing behavior, even in ungrounded cases. Naturally, modifier combinations work on vault exits too. Using what we've covered so far, we can modify freeform exit range, either flying further out, which is great for smooth momentum preservation, or lower, rather closer to the vault location. I find the parkour down low combination particularly useful, as it exits close enough to let me manually grab to my rear at any point of the fall. If there's something to grab, you can use it for some very neat descent chains. Moving on, all force hang variations apply as well, from standalone force hang to dive beam, near miss, etc. With that in mind, you might end up using far dives more often with vaults to compensate for the shorter range. Having covered the various ways in which we control exits, let's look back at vault entries again. As vaults replace prescriptive foot landings, this means we can perform them even when targeting edges from within a surface. This is where parkour down low is especially useful, as you can easily guarantee vaulting on an edge by utilizing its heavy tendency to force foot landings, getting turned into a vault instead. These function essentially identically to previously mentioned vaults, even targeting below. The only difference is in the fact that they cannot detect standing surfaces but only their edges or other objects, with attempts at vaulting down to flat ground always resulting in a vault to hang by default, though possible to override with any freeform exit variant. The mod makes the KIOSK dive animation fully manual, by holding triangle while prescriptively targeting for a foot landing. If held while executing the entry action, be it a jump, eject, swing or vault, the KIOSK dive plays out of the following foot landing, making it somewhat similar to vaults. Unlike vaults though, you can redirect them within a certain angle range during their start. This angle range isn't static though, turning with your character and allowing gradual rotation into even facing backwards. KIOSK dives are generally neat for varying up certain descents and stylishly crossing smaller gaps, but they don't gain height, at most sliding onto surfaces as high as the starting position. When used for descents, they smoothly keep the character pointing downward for a short while, after which they reset into a free fall, unable to land as smoothly. Note that the unlocked directional angle can allow for KIOSK dives that, when performed through an actual kiosk, can trap you inside. Much like vaults, applying parkour down or fire to their entry only affects entry targeting. Whereas freeform works differently though, instantly forcing a KIOSK dive upon action execution at any angle. It's even possible to press force freeform and triangle alone to force it midair, shortly after entering an airtime. Unlike vaults, KIOSK dives are also strictly freeform actions, unable to target any context, but their exit strength can still be modified by parkour down, fire, or down low. Of course, adding force freeform to the mix will simply instantly execute a dive of the respective strength. Now that we've covered the very meat of the mod through modifiers and their combinations, let's look at the remaining important functionality. Starting with a very welcome feature, the mod entirely disables all instances of the staggered, slow stumble, executed when barely having reached an object or edge and, most annoyingly, when Ezio lands at certain angles, removing interruptions from landings that are already bound to a destination. Furthermore, the mod severely reduces the NSO snap that Ezio may execute when prescriptively heading for the same object at close angles, or instances of snapping to the very starting point. By default, snapping is still enabled for all freeform airtimes and may also happen when pushing mod features at tight angles, but can be fully disabled by going to the cheat tables window and finding the Disable Snap option under the Disable Snap on NSO landing entry, and double-clicking the entry selection on the right to open the drop-down menu, selecting Always Disable Snap and clicking OK. Regardless of whether you've disabled the snap or kept it dynamic, you can still manually enable its full vanilla behavior by holding head or triangle on a PS controller, coming in especially handy if you've fully disabled snapping and wish to land on NSOs from a freefall. Fast ejects are an extremely powerful passive feature, eliminating the recovery period between entering any foot hang and being able to eject from it. In vanilla, we actively had to look for a specific grab type to get to instantly eject. The mod instead allows for a near instant eject out of any foot hang, whether for manual grabs, prescriptive hang targeting, or even drop and vault to hang. It also cancels staggered recoveries from greater falls, but if doing so feels off to you from too great a height, you can simply wait it out. This feature especially empowers eject optimization consisting of hang into eject chains of any type for any purpose. As you've already noticed from previous clips, I often make use of fast ejects to navigate cases where performing them from wall runs would have been more awkward, if not impossible, or simply to add some flow and variety. Fast eject doesn't only refer to ejects either, as it works with climb leaps of any type, although Ezio sometimes first has to perform a short climb up. The mod also passively provides increased directional freedom when performing ejects. Firstly, it eliminates the 90-degree directional angle snap when pointing side ejects within a surrounding angle range, allowing for slight, yet often meaningful diagonal adjustments. Additionally, it slightly extends the allowed angle inward a degree or two beyond the usual limit of 90. While seemingly unremarkable, this can aid descents requiring slightly inward targeting, gentle corner wraparounds, or dives and other force hang variants pointed at near, if not exactly parallel objects. Of course, it isn't strong enough to allow for self-ejects, that is, ejects that gain height targeting the very object or ledge you're hanging from, as that would defeat their purpose. The last improvement refers exclusively to AC Brotherhood and Revelations, where the base games introduced a strict 90-degree snap to ejects performed by cancelling a wall run, only allowing 3 eject directions. The mod overrides these restrictions, returning full omnidirectionality when cancelling wall runs. While it's only possible to roll straight in vanilla, the mod lets you redirect the roll up to 45 degrees to each side simply by pointing in the desired direction. This is particularly useful when a straight roll might lead you into a drop or wall, where redirecting it may help or leave you facing a more advantageous direction. Water dives are also entirely passively disabled, preventing you from accidentally executing them near water. It's still possible to manually perform them, but we'll look into that later. Coming from fast ejects, what if we wish to cancel these recovery periods into something else, like a climb, pull-up, or vault from hang? While not a passive feature, we can enable it by pressing legs while holding the input to our desired action, only after the character starts hanging off the surface, no high profile needed. Of course, you don't need to follow it up with an action, as tapping legs alone still cancels the recovery. It's worth noting that perfect grabs, that is, grabs where the character holds onto a handhold with hands as well as feet, require a very fast cancel, otherwise functioning as in vanilla, only allowing for an instant eject. Moving on to examples, to quickly pull up this ledge after entering a hang, I normally pointed the left stick up, then quickly pressed legs, which instantly triggered it. In the following example, I jumped into a hang on this sign, pointing the left stick up again, with the addition of vault to perform a vault from hang. Then, to skip the cooldown, I tapped legs, instantly pulling it off. The very same thing applies to starting climbs, but you might notice a different move playout if pointed to the side, being a manual H2H. The term H2H simply means hang to hang, and specifically refers to this collection of prescriptive actions that, over a certain distance, fluidly transfer the character from one hang to another. The mod provides manual control over a certain subset of them, letting you force them even in contexts where the character would normally climb sideways. As we already know, it's activated by pointing to a side and holding legs without high profile, but there's more to it. To execute an H2H again, you can't simply keep holding legs, but will have to let go and then start holding again. If the character doesn't instantly perform it, instead starting with a slight climb, keep holding legs as it sometimes needs to adjust to the right hang before executing. So, if the H2H takes priority, does that mean it's impossible to instantly climb to the side? Not at all. Let's look back at our ability to cancel recovery with no follow-up. If we first tap legs to cancel, only pointing to the side after letting go, the character will indeed instantly climb sideways. Returning to the manual H2H, its main use is quite clear. When in a foot hang and just out of range for an eject, it's a rather elegant, great-looking way of displacing yourself to the side, especially in scenarios where an eject grab chain wouldn't look good or isn't possible. It can also be pointed slightly diagonally, letting you bias to higher or lower handholds. In this specific example, biasing it upwards let me perform a foot landing eject instead of targeting a hang landing. In close proximity to various handholds, it will unfortunately target very close, unlike how it tends to appear in vanilla, especially along ledges or other longer handholds. Regardless, it's a very smooth and useful tool. Next to foot hangs, the H2H can be forced onto free hangs down a single object and sometimes even transitions from one to the other. In base AC1 to Brotherhood, the ledge grab is extremely freeing, allowing for manual grabs in all normal air times in any direction, with one basic restriction: enabling only after the action's arc starts moving downwards, in other words, after passing the apex. While this behavior makes sense, reducing volatility in most scenarios, the ability to manually grab while moving upwards has plenty uses. Using the mod, fast ledge grab is enabled simply by holding high profile while attempting to grab, requiring no other modifiers. In Revelations, the use of high profile on ledge grabs is different, but retains normal HOOKBLADE grabs, while low profile disables the HOOKBLADE, returning the old ledge grab instead. While this induces a compromise, with the HOOKBLADE biasing certain grabs lower than normal ones and therefore slightly losing out on height gain potential, it's not so different from fast ledge grab, as the HOOKBLADE instantly grabs by default, even in base game. Fast drop refers to the ability to reduce the short pause between starting a hang off an object or ledge and being able to drop from it. The mod concretely provides 3 speeds at which you can perform it. The first only requires you to hold empty hand while in the hang entry animation, allowing you to press it to enter a hang, then continue holding for a fast, smooth drop. The slightly faster variant works much in the same way, but with the addition of holding force freeform alongside empty hand. Lastly, the fastest variant is enabled by adding high profile to the previous combination, so empty hand, force freeform and high profile nearly instantly dropping into a fall. Additionally, fast drop doesn't only work on manual hangs, but vault the hangs too. Though, as it would be rather uncomfortable to simultaneously hold, if not carefully time vault an empty hand has also been made to force vaults into a hang. This way you can run through a vault to hang into a fast drop by holding one button. Naturally, it can also be performed from the safety hang when jogging off too high an edge, and the fast, high-profile hang in Revelations. To grab something after having dropped, you'll first have to let go of empty hand before pressing it again when you wish to grab. This was done to avoid having to let go of it once the drop is over, as it would otherwise instantly grab the very object you dropped from. I personally almost always use the slowest variant, as it provides sufficient speed whilst remaining smooth and best connected, giving the hang entry just enough time to finish and resulting in a drop that's best positioned and properly matched to its hang type, be it the foot hang or free hang. The other variants instead always cancel into a foot hang drop animation, with the fastest doing so most out of place. The mod also lets you drop out of any point of a corner swing animation by tapping empty hand, much like any other vanilla drop. It's worth noting that it unfortunately induces a camera bug in Revelations though, while it'll follow Ezio's descents extremely slowly, but it's possible to reset by executing a corner swing again without dropping. In the base games, attempting to jog off a standing surface with high profile, if done within a certain angle, will only allow dropping from lesser heights, otherwise playing out the safety hang. The mod provides 2 ways of overriding this behavior, either with force freeform or parkour down. Holding force freeform while jogging off will simply disable the safety hang, letting your character jog into a freefall. Combining it with parkour down, fire or down low also allows for control over the fall range, with parkour down low being particularly versatile, forcing a drop right along the adjacent surface. Using parkour down alone, on the other hand, still functions the same if there's nothing below to scan for, but will attempt to prescriptively target NSOs or surface edges if they're in close proximity below you. Best of all, you can still try applying certain modifiers to it, like force hang, KIOSK dive and even vault. This is particularly useful in tight contexts when targeting a low landing or swinging within very tight distances, with the downside of requiring a standing surface to start from. We've seen many ways to descend by now, be it through freeform parkour down, dive beam, vaults, etc. Still, there's one remaining function that, though more situational, is a neat addition to the roster. Beam drop, as the name suggests, works when perched on beams or other NSOs, more specifically, from states in which you aren't standing upright. Much like ledge drops, beam drops also have a freeform and parkour down variant. Starting with the freeform beam drop, it's activated by holding empty hand and force freeform without other buttons, gently hopping off in the direction you're pointing to. Adding high profile then performs a stronger version of the same action, but that isn't all. The high profile beam drop variant also allows for biasing using parkour down, fire, or down low. Overall, it may seem redundant, technically being a more situational replacement for either version of the freeform parkour down hop, but it hosts a unique property. Beam drop will only actuate when there's space to hop off, preventing jumps onto the NSO you're already on. It also applies an angular restriction to just how far to the side you can point it for the same reason. Moving on to the parkour down beam drop variant, it's instead activated by holding empty hand and parkour down alone. If there is no object or ledge to target, it hops into a freefall, essentially performing a freeform beam drop. Its true function instead shows in the presence of nearby, low objects or surface edges whom it prescriptively targets, although with a highly limited range. And much like ledge drops, it can also be combined with force hang, KIOSK dive, or even vault. As previously mentioned, sitting on NSOs isn't the only valid scenario, as the hunched over position during prescriptive foot landings also counts. I personally don't use beam drops much, but if you appreciate the added restraint or slightly different jump arcs, it's a great descent method. There's yet another action we can perform when perched on NSOs, being the self-swing. Activated by holding force hang and empty hand while jumping in the direction you wish to swing, self-swing initiates a dive into the very object you're perched on, smoothly transitioning into a hang and most notably letting you swing in a single motion. More specifically, it can be performed in situations nearly identical to the beam drop, even if obviously most useful from beams, ropes or other contexts you can freely hang from. Self-swing internally functions by making the character target a force hang from behind their actual position, manifesting as them targeting the very object they're actually perched on. After picking the target, they jump from their real position, with the animation and trajectory pairing very smoothly. Sometimes self-swing can even target slightly lower if a free hang and consequently swing is only possible from there. This is relatively similar in result to dropping into a free hang and using instant swing, but I personally much prefer the way in which this visually flows. As we've mentioned, you can also utilize this move to initiate foot hangs, but there's less utility there. If executing a self-swing in Revelations, note that letting go of legs before high profile and empty hand will interrupt it with a hook blade grab. Lastly, for this section, the mod also lets you force rolls on landings from any height instead of requiring a certain falling velocity. This is possible by holding empty hand as you approach the landing. In the Ezio trilogy, there's a second, slightly different, softer roll type 2, activated by adding force freeform to the empty hand bind. What's interesting about this roll is that it can be executed on flat ground all by itself by holding its binds as you execute the manual jump. Additionally, it's possible to execute the soft roll even after a prescriptive foot landing, much in the same way, holding its normal binds while keeping the inputs necessary to sprint. When done from greater heights though, it can look a bit odd due to this short delay. Before getting into active functionality, it's worth noting that the mod passively slightly enhances hook blade targeting, allowing for it to chain into leaps in certain locations where the base game prevents them. Moving on, it's possible to use certain modifiers to partially control or rather choose the hook blade action you wish to perform while wall running or climbing, with the first being activated by parkour down, aka L1. Holding L1 while executing a hook blade leap doesn't significantly change behavior, but simply forces the most common hook blade leap even in cases where another would have played out in base game. The next variant is activated by holding parkour fire instead, where it forces the longer, more eccentric hook blade leap animation. There's yet more to these two, as holding the vault modifier at the end of their execution adds the small additional climb assist. Continuing to hold their inputs then also chains into forced pull-up, but it's easily preventable by simply letting go before it happens. It's also possible to force the climb sequence initially intended for overhang boosts by holding force hang, forcing the end of the hook blade sequence into free hang state. No climb assist is available with these, but holding its bind still allows for a forced pull-up. This faster leap variant is also accessible by combining L1 and L2, being extremely useful for very fast eject follow-ups. As Ezio performs this action purely with his hands, neither a bonus assist nor forced pull-up apply to it. Lastly, holding force freeform during the hook blade's wall run phase or while in a stationary foot hang allows for a non-hook blade freeform climb leap from the previous games. Much like most other parkour actions, the corner swing launch in Revelations isn't as locked in as normal corner swings and can prescriptively target as well as go freeform. This means the mod can influence its behavior through modifiers analogously to other actions. For example, if a launch was to target a foot landing, executing it with force hang will indeed force prescriptive hang targeting, even if there's no smooth animation transition. In this concrete example, I used it to smoothly swing off this object, making the corner swing part of my parkour down path. Unfortunately, the targeting is a bit more finicky and can't get chained into vaults. Naturally, force freeform can also be applied to the launch as well as combined with biases and modifiers, but it isn't all. Performing a freeform launch also allows for control over its direction within a specific angle range. You might also notice how pointing in a specific direction turns Ezio even when prescriptively targeting, although only rotating his model without influence on targeting. This can still be a useful mechanic when landing on a standing surface if you wish to prime Ezio to instantly run in the desired direction. When on a zipline, it's now possible to drop within a specific angle range of 30 degrees to each side simply by pointing in the desired direction before dropping. This may seem like a minor addition, but greatly enhances zipline versatility. Beside our ability to influence swing targeting down or further out, it's also possible to bias it upwards, beyond the base game's limit. It's performed by pointing in the desired direction and combining parkour fire with legs without high profile, as that would cause a normal parkour fire swing. There are two reasons behind this combo, the first obviously caused by a limited number of sensical inputs, where parkour fire swings keep the more intuitive input for the sake of consistency. The second is swing up's considerable height gaining ability, making it very powerful. The unconventional bind then helps avoid accidental activation, requiring agency from the player to access. With this power in mind, it's easy to imagine how it could look odd or severely break grounding, but swing up is rather unique as it dynamically adapts its range to your entry's magnitude. When performed between objects of similar distances and heights, it'll manage to make it back up, while targeting higher or further will then require greater dives depending on your target, with the strongest of swing-ups truly calling for some massive dives, simulating some energy loss and avoiding truly absurd targeting. On the other hand, attempting to swing up from below won't have much, if any, effect, as the player's entry velocity wouldn't be as high and would otherwise get in the way of eject optimization. Performing swings from a still hang, initiated through the wind-up, also applies a slight static value. Both the vertical and horizontal dive distance affect swing-up strength, with verticality being more important. Still, you'll come across several cases where starting further back makes the difference between success and failure, and learning to judge these distances becomes quite rewarding. Swing-up strength doesn't only affect height either, as the value's increase can often help you target further destinations too. These calculations function with intuition, fairness, and believability in mind, while remaining as forgiving as possible and avoiding simply bad-looking targeting. While it might take a while to adjust to, it should feel quite good and enter your intuition rather quickly. It's also this exact value that drives freeform fire swings. Additionally, if a swing-up attempt isn't strong enough, it'll try targeting for a foot hang instead. Otherwise, without sufficient entry magnitude, it attempts targeting lower, or results in a normal freeform swing in the absence of any target. While swing-up mostly benefits aesthetic use rather than practicality, there's plenty cases in which it enables certain optimizations with careful environment processing. Moving on to its combinations, swing-up can be combined with parkour down to produce something similar to a parkour down low swing, but that obviously defeats the purpose. Adding force freeform doesn't provide anything special either, simply producing a freeform fire swing. Force hang, on the other hand, affects it rather uniquely, adding a considerable static boost to its strength, emulating how the character should be able to grab slightly higher than they can reach with feet. This is extremely useful for eject follow-ups, but note that it may sometimes produce some wild results. It's possible to add parkour down to this bind as well, but there's obviously better methods for such targeting. As expected, vaulting out of swing up is also possible by adding the vault input to legs. And while other combinations may also work, they provide little use with swing up. Much like self-flip, the remaining horseflip functionality is exclusive to Brotherhood and Revelations, where we'll be referring to the outward swinging variant as the horseflip from now on. Horseflips are performed by pointing in the desired direction before combining parkour fire with square, also without high profile. Reasoning similar to swing up backs this combination due to limited inputs, while their actual binds follow the same logic, as horseflips use the exact same swing up math. Horseflips are therefore very similar to swing ups, prioritizing higher targeting, attempting to foot hang if too weak, otherwise targeting low or performing a freeform horseflip. As horseflips produce a flip when descending, there's an aesthetic reason to use them even when intending to go low. Personally, I largely use horseflips after greater dives for roleplay purposes, when it feels it would make sense for Ezio to dissipate excess momentum by flipping, avoiding repetitive overuse. Also keep in mind that beams of this type, with the lantern mounted on the side, can sometimes break the flip animation early due to odd behavior induced by the lantern counting as a separate NSO. Moving on to its combinations, much like swing up, horse flips can be combined with force hang, but still won't result in a flip when targeting for hangs. One possible alternative, if you truly wish to flip into a hang, is to induce a near miss by adding force freeform, then manually grabbing the object. Unlike swing up though, adding force freeform alone has more use, ensuring a freeform flip regardless of context. There's utility in the parkour down bias too, and absolutely ensuring lower targeting while still flipping. Naturally, these modifiers can also be combined to largely expectable results. Lastly, looking back at the first horse flip variant being self flips, we came across cases where the system preventing clipping disabled them in certain valid scenarios. Forcing a self flip regardless of context is achieved by directionally pointing the horse flip backwards instead of doing so with a normal swing input. Just pay attention not to perform it when actually clipping through a surface. Let's return to force hang and the two different types of behavior depending on whether it's down from a jump, eject or vault as opposed to a swing. As we mentioned, it's possible to swap their behavior, that is, giving jumps and ejects swing targeting and vice versa. The swap is achieved by holding square while performing any of the prescriptive force hang variants. As square is mainly the vault modifier though, this is indeed a breach of the usual combination logic, as the alternative force hang isn't connected to vaults, with the mod simply needing to fit the bind into a rather limited number of sensical inputs, all while avoiding conflict. To reiterate, when using the alternative force hang with non-swing moves, do so with care in order to not get impaired by its strong volatility. There's another niche application of parkour far I thought best left to this section. In the beginning, most of our examples examined how it leads to prescriptive foot landings, but there's a bit more to it. When there's nothing to target for a foot landing, parkour far actually starts functioning like a special force hang variant that strives to fully maximize the targeting height, sometimes beyond other force hang combinations. It also works at the same expanded angles as force hang, making it very useful for achieving otherwise difficult or impossible high hangs. Looking back at parkour far's foot landings, there's an additional beneficial property to its ability to handle certain angles better, as it often helps Ezio more consistently target these shallow angle eject landings that are otherwise heavily nerfed in Brotherhood and Revelations, usually failing to target. Returning to vault functionality, while relatively situational, it's possible to force parkour down and far vault exits into landing with feet if they were to target for a hang. This is simply performed by holding legs alongside either parkour down or far as the vault performs its exit. This isn't particularly usable, let alone grounded with most vaults, but exists if you ever come across a context in which you truly need it, likely on walls. Despite contextual water dives being passively disabled, it's possible to manually trigger them anywhere out of a jump or eject by adding force freeform and vault. Up to a certain height, it must be landed with a roll to avoid ragdolling, which is guaranteed past a considerable threshold. Adding parkour down, far or down low in conjunction influences its range too. I personally find it very silly in most cases, as it doesn't make too much sense to land massive dives head first, but is there should you wish to use it for any purpose, be it actual water dives, smaller ground landings or any other reason. There's another feature customizable within a cheat engine window similarly to the snap disable, where it's possible to permanently enable the ledge drop at any height, not requiring any input. The mod also allows for control over the character's maximum walking and running speed by cycling through 3 walk speeds next to its default. As this feature mostly benefits keyboard and mouse users, the toggle is only accessible by pressing Alt. To revert your chosen walk speed back to default, there's no need to toggle between them until you've found the right one, as simply starting a jog or sprint, if not entering an airtime, automatically resets it. This is useful if you lost track of your selected speed, or if you tend to tab in and out of the game often. The eject animation fix is a minor, entirely aesthetic tweak to the Ezio trilogy, fixing the animation mirroring snap that would occur most notably after cancelling wall runs into left-facing ejects. The KIOSK dive isn't the only manual KIOSK action, as it's also possible to pull off this KIOSK side swing with similar logic, either queuing it up into a foot landing or performing it freeform. Once queued up, it will either face left or right depending on where you're pointing. Unlike the dive though, its exit isn't affected by modifiers. While it makes little sense in most contexts, this move can look quite good when performed through rooftop hiding spots like this. As the final kiosk subtlety, it's possible to cancel any kiosk action, be it a dive or side swing, in the middle of its execution simply by pressing empty hand. This is useful if your kiosk action, most notably a dive, has too much range for an action you wish to follow it up with, a wall run for example. As the name suggests, this feature is essentially an almost entirely unrestrained predecessor to the forced foot landing behavior of parkour down low, and remains largely as a legacy feature due to how it inherently breaks jump range, distance, and targeting, expressing extreme volatility and unpredictability. It can still be useful in certain rare cases where other forced foot landing methods don't function, but it's not intended for use when it breaks the game's targeting. If you intend to use it, do so with care. And finally, after arguably way too long, we have reached the end. I truly hope this guide fulfills its purpose and helps as many of you as possible, regardless of how invested or technical you wish to get. I also apologize for taking as long as I did to make it, but I wanted to ensure complete coverage and present my knowledge well. There are still certain smaller tricks to this mod that I couldn't fit into here, but rest assured that this guide contains all you could likely ever need. I also wish to thank Henry PDT for the incredible amounts of dedication and work put into this mod in general, and especially the most recent V10 update. He has dealt with countless suggestions and instances of feedback stemming from myself and others, implemented so many features and quality of life improvements, and ironed it out as closely as possible to perfection. That being said, enjoy the mod and take care.